over traumatic injury as a result of an accident some time ago. His leg was amputated below the knee, and he is someone who loves the Lord and also is Jeff Keene joining us today here in the Meeting House on Faith Radio. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for how you are allowing God to use you to bring hope and encouragement.
Thank you very much for having me on today.
Let's begin by just giving our listeners an idea about your story. As I mentioned, you were a firefighter, and you were at the time you were in the vicinity, I believe, of New York City. Long Island, New York, actually was the place.
Yes.
And you were a rookie firefighter in Long Island, and this was actually over 35 years ago, or around 35 years ago, when this took place. So take us back to the day of that accident. Give us an idea about what happened. Sure.
Yes, I was a volunteer firefighter in Freeport, Long Island, which is just outside of New York. As a matter of fact, a lot of the guys who volunteer in our town also work as full-time firefighters in New York City proper. So I was only in for a year at that time. Again, I was just past my rookie stage, I guess you'd say, and had completed my 300 years, not years, I'm sorry, hours. It felt like 300 years of training. Pretty difficult training, and that's important so that when it comes to real life fires, you know what you're doing. But nothing prepared me for what happened on this fateful evening on Labor Day weekend in 1989. Just a couple weeks before my 19th birthday, I stepped off of the fire truck at a fire call to turn around and grab the hose. And when I did, I tripped, and my foot fell beneath the rear wheel of the multi-ton firefighting apparatus, and the truck stopped on my foot and crushed it. So that's the story in a nutshell right there.
Obviously, this was a devastating situation, an injury. So as you went through the process and the treatment, at what point did the doctors give you the information that they would actually have to amputate part of your leg?
Yeah, they tried to save it for about 3 weeks. And that's always the goal. And what can we do? They even sent me home for about 5 days, and it was becoming a worst case scenario. The tissue damage was so great, the blood flow had been so depleted that the tissue was turning really gangrenous. And so they even had an idea of taking a muscle from my back and putting it in the bottom of my foot to try to help the healing down there. But, it's hard at anybody's age, but particularly a young person, to have to make this decision to remove a body part, particularly something that's going to change the entire course of your life and the decisions that you make in the future. So the day after my 19th birthday is when they amputated my foot about 6 inches below my knee.
Jeff Keene II joining us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio and faithradio.org. And that one occurrence really changing the trajectory of his life. He came into a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ and discovered more about God's plan for his life. We'll hear more. Jeff Keene coming up. You were sharing with us some of the details about this injury, the amputation of part of your leg. And I'd like to ask you this. At the time this happened, it was, as I recall, it was just before your 19th birthday.
Yes.
So what was your spiritual condition at this time?
That's a very good question, because I was not a believer. I was not saved. Oftentimes when traumatic injuries happen like this, we reach out to somebody to find, to place blame upon, and we blame everybody. We blame mismanagement. We blame In this case, it was the driver of the fire truck, the owner of the property where the fire was. You blame yourself, and ultimately, if you're a believer, perhaps you may blame God, and I probably would have blamed God at that time, but something miraculous that I could only see in hindsight occurred just a week later after my amputation, and it could only have come from God, which ultimately, not immediately, but ultimately led me to my salvation. And it was me turning the blame into forgiveness, and so I forgave the fire truck driver who was going to quit driving the fire truck altogether. He was going to quit being a firefighter, a veteran, decorated fireman was going to quit because of what had happened. And somehow God put it on my heart, even though I wasn't a believer, to forgive this man. And it was quite miraculous if you look back at it.
And so how did that progress to the point where you accepted Jesus as your Savior?
Again, it was a process of things. It wasn't an immediate event for me. It didn't happen until years later when my daughter was born, and then everything kind of, like I said, in hindsight, kind of fell into place. And then I saw God's plan. Why did this happen to me? I was going to be a firefighter. I was going to do this. I was going to do that. And then you look back and you say, "Oh, thank you, God." That whole story about, thank God for the broken road that led me here. And that's the story. Everything, God is in the details. And if you allow him to take over, everything falls into place. You see where all of the rights and the lefts that you did make or shouldn't have made, and all the doors that were closed and then were ultimately opened, come into play. And then you say, all right, I get it now, and that's what led to my salvation.
Well, it's interesting because I think that in our own human wisdom, we think we have everything figured out about God, and especially in difficult situations, in the trials, the challenges we face, when we're not crying out, "Lord, how long?" as the psalmist did. We're trying to, ask these questions, and sometimes we don't necessarily have the answers. After all, Isaiah says that God's ways are higher than our own. You mentioned something about really God's plan for your life, and I'm paraphrasing here, kind of falling into focus. So tell me, once you're on the other, as you might say, the other side of that salvation experience, having a relationship with Christ, so how did you see God bring more clarity as far as his plan for your life?
Well, because when you walk through this world as a lost person, very little of what happens to you and to what you see happening to others makes any sense at all. Okay? We have to accept the good with the bad. We have to accept the losses with the wins, the gives and the takes. But you don't realize that that's his ultimate purpose and his plan, that we're not, as you said, we're not meant to understand his plan. And once you come to grips with that, something like losing a foot it can become more acceptable, because that I know, and I would like to be able to speak for others, and that's why I wrote this book, to help them realize that they can be okay, and some ways to make that happen. But you'll be better in a place where God wanted you, and these things had to happen for that to occur. Yeah.
Jeff Keene II joining us today here on the Meeting House. This is the Meeting House here on Faith Radio. And Jeff, let's talk about how this book came to be. Share with me, if you would, some of the inspiration for it.
Absolutely. Well, it took a long time, to be honest. This accident occurred in 1989, and I was by no means ready to tell my story. It was part of the healing process. There's a lot, that goes along with losing a limb. Some people liken it to losing a family member, and so there's a grieving process, and there's post-traumatic stress, and all of the healing that has to go on in order for you to mature enough, no matter what age you are. Granted, I was 19, but it doesn't matter what age you are. You have to be mature enough in your process of dealing with your situation that and will enable you to tell your story in a helpful way, because many people will tell their story in a blameful way or a hurtful way, but that doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't even do the person telling it any good. It's not cathartic. It's not healing. It's a negative way to tell things. But when you can tell it in a positive way, and you can say how it made things better in the long run, because it made you who you are, made you stronger, and made you able to share your story, then that's where you reach that pinnacle where you're able to tell the story. And so that's what happened with me in writing this book. Not to mention, I had already written a couple of biblical fiction novels and published them traditionally through a publisher. And so that helped me with the writing process and able to get a book with my story that is good enough for my readers.
Now, do you incorporate other stories in addition to your own?
In this book, I did not. That is an idea I do have going on into the future, because you can only imagine how many stories there are out there, particularly with first responders, firefighters, police officers, EMS, doctors, and then and their experiences with this, because they're they're in the front lines, and because of that they receive more injuries than the average person, but it's definitely a possibility. Yeah.
Well, when you consider the vulnerability of those who are first responders, as you mentioned, to this type of, what's called traumatic injury, in your particular situation involved the amputation of part of your leg. And so I'd like for you to comment just a bit or elaborate on the vulnerabilities that those who are our first responders actually face.
Right. So, it's very similar to being a military person, where the increased chances of structural damage, to a building or to a car fire, during a car fire, you're just out there more. And what that's going to do is not only physically put you in harm, but mentally as well. So we have to look at the emotional and mental trauma that goes along with these positions as well. That's one of the reasons why I put in the very beginning of my book a link to for help hotline for those who are dealing with post-traumatic stress and possible needing to seek professional help. Like I said in the book, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any background in psychology other than educational psychology. So I'm just sharing my story and my triumph over my torture, my solace over my suffering, and conquest over confusion through God over my traumatic injury, and that's my purpose.
As we conclude, this is obviously a book about what you experienced with respect to trauma, but as I understand, you really bring out the fact that trauma affects people in a variety of different ways. Obviously, there's the physical element, but you also have people that face emotional trauma, that have mental type of mental health issues, I guess you could say. We have those that are feeling, as the Bible refers to, brokenness of spirit. So when someone is facing trauma, what do you put forth as perhaps one or more of the keys that people really can apply to their lives in order to really experience what God has in store for them, even in the midst of difficulty?
Right. Yeah, the trauma that you mentioned didn't even necessarily have to happen to you. You could have seen something in a particular event, and doesn't necessarily have to be at a fire call or a police call or something like that. It could be your own family member. It could have been a car accident. But the main point here is that through God, your chances of healing post-traumatically are increased, 100-fold. I honestly don't know how others do it without God. It's hard to believe once you have your own eyes opened. It's hard to believe that that other people, and maybe they never do. As a believer, we have to think that way. So if you look at the opportunities that you have to serve others, even if you're just sitting in a wheelchair and talking to others or telling your story, you're helping. So everybody can do their part, and it's easier when you realize that God put you in this position for a reason.
Jeff Keene joining us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio, online at faithradio.org and through the Faith Radio app. And we'll be wrapping things up here in the next few minutes on this edition of Injury. And Jeff, if people want to find out more information about you, I know that you are very active on social media. You have a website. So give us an idea about how people can connect with you.
Yes, I am on Facebook and Instagram under the title Peg Leg Penman, and that's my website as well, thepeglegpenman.com. And you can find some bio information about me and some other interesting tidbits about other books that I've written. I've got another couple of books coming out as well. So.
Well, that is awesome. Let me just ask you a very practical question as we wrap up. So with your injury being such as it is, how does that affect you today?
I would not be the same person. And this goes on what I said before about knowing God's plan, or at least realizing that he has a plan, is that I would not be the same person that I am today if this had not happened to me. Very, very many things would be different, and who knows who I'd be, but I probably would not be the person that God wanted me to be.
Very good. Jeff Keene joining us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio. Great to have you along. PegLegPenman.com. You can also look for him under that handle on social media, and the name of the book, again, When the Other Boot Drops. Jeff, thank you so much for spending some time with us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio.